So here I have hydrogen, and I have the most common isotope of hydrogen, which has no neutrons. Um, right now you'll see that it's a neutral atom. A neutral atom is an atom that you have the same number of protons and electrons. The neutral part just means that you have a neutral or zero charge. Or what that means is that the positive charges of the protons and the negative charges of the electrons will cancel each other out. So we're going to talk about ions. So ions occur when an atom loses or gains electrons. And this results in a net charge. Now, ions deal with the gain or loss of electrons. A neutral atom is an atom that has the same number of electrons as it does protons. And so if you lose an electron, you'll see that you suddenly become a positive ion. And so I'm going to open up this net charge. We can see that we've got a 1 plus charge or a positive charge there. If you gain an electron, then if you have the same amount of positive and negative, you're going to have a charge of 0 or no charge. If you gain another electron and you have one more electron than you do protons, you'll have a negative charge. So let's look at another element. So here's lithium, and we currently have a neutral atom of lithium. Now, lithium is used in making batteries and other things because of its ability to become an ion. And so if we're dealing with ions, you might notice here we've got the nucleus in the center. We're going to leave the nucleus completely untouched. And what we're going to change is the electrons. These blue circles are representing our electrons. So I'm going to pull an electron out, and we've got a positive ion. And that's what happens with the lithium, is it loses an electron and becomes an ion. So here's nitrogen, and currently we've got a neutral atom because we have a net charge where all of the protons and all of the electrons canceling out each other's charge. Remember, we're not touching our nucleus here. Nothing's going to change. Only the electrons are changing. So nitrogen is going to typically gain electrons. And so when you gain an electron, you become a negative ion. So let's put a few extra electrons on there. And we can see that if nitrogen gains 3 extra electrons, then it ends up with a 3 minus charge. So sometimes charge can kind of be a little bit tricky for people. We're going to look at charge with nuclear symbols. So here we've got the nuclear symbol for calcium, and this would be called calcium 40 because of the mass. And we've got a 2 plus charge. And yes, with ions, when we're writing the charge, we actually write the positive or negative symbol after the number. See if you can figure out how many protons calcium has, and then neutrons, and then we'll figure out the electrons using the charge of our calcium ion. All right, so number of protons, hopefully you can check real fast and see the atomic number is 20. Do a little bit of math. 40 minus 20 is 20. And electrons, this part before you had an ion, you would just take protons and stick that in the electrons part. But charge changes things up a little bit. So when we have a charge, we need to take that into account. So our charge, which I'm going to represent with a C, is equivalent to the difference between your number of protons and your number of electrons. So protons, and it's the difference. So basically, because electrons are negative, there's 2 ways you could go about this. You could simply subtract electrons, or you can add electrons, but knowing that electrons contribute a negative charge, so we're just going to put a minus there for subtracting the number of electrons. And so our number of protons is 20, and our number of electrons, well, we don't know. But what we do know is that we've got to have a 2+ charge. Now, what do you have to have for electrons? Well, 20 minus what gives you a positive 2. And so 20 minus 18 would give you a positive 2. And so that's where this charge comes from. All right, what about this one? What is the atomic number? What is the number of neutrons? And how many electrons? So where nuclear symbols and charge can be a little bit tricky for people is, remember, it deals with gaining or losing electrons. But because electrons are negative, it's a little bit opposite from what you might think. So gaining an electron will give you a negative charge. So therefore, if you want a positive charge, you've got to lose electrons. You might think of this as carrying around a backpack full of rocks, and the rocks are the electrons. They're negative and they're weighing down on you. If you dump some out, you're going to feel light and positive. So if you get rid of electrons, you become positive. So a loss of electrons then will result in a positive charge. There's no number here. Well, remember in chemistry, often when it comes to ones, the number 1, we don't write the number. Positive means it's a 1+ charge. So the question is, how do we get that charge? So remember, our formula is that our charge is equal to protons minus electrons. And we're solving for our electrons. One thing that can be helpful in chemistry is when you have a formula, sometimes it's helpful to rearrange it in terms of what you're solving for before you plug in any numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and just, because I want my electrons to be a positive number that I'm solving for, I'm going to add that to both sides. So now we'll have charge plus electrons equals our number of protons. And we want to get the electrons by themselves. Subtract from both sides our charge. So the electrons is equivalent to the number of protons, subtract the charge. So now we can plug that in. So how many electrons do we have? Well, we take our electrons are equal to, and we know that we've got 47 protons. And because this is positive, we know it's a 1. So it's minus 1. All right, so easy enough. And so that means we've got 46 electrons. So this one, we've got a negative charge. All right, so we got protons, 17. 37 minus 17 is 20. That gives us neutrons. Well, here's our formula. The number of electrons will be the number of protons minus the charge. And so we can quickly put that in. We're going to have 17 protons. And remember, because there's no number, this is a 1, and it's a 1 minus. And so we're subtracting a negative 1. And whenever you subtract a negative number, that means you're going to add that number. And so our number of electrons then is going to be 17 plus 1. And there we go.